According to a report from CBS Sports' Jonathan Jones, Commanders head coach Ron Rivera's days in the nation's capital are limited. Welcome into the Commanders Report. I am your host, Jack Sperry, and today we're going to be talking about what a potential firing of Rivera at the end of the season means not only for the Commanders moving forward, but also Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator, and his potential prospects of becoming this team's next head coach. But before we break down everything today, including a top 10 list of the top Ron Rivera replacements. I've updated my list after this recent report. Make sure you like today's video if you want Ron Rivera to be fired as the head coach of the Washington Commanders. You better be spamming that like button to start today's video. Now let's go over the report here from Jonathan Jones from CBS Sports, who says that multiple sources tell CBS Sports that managing partner Josh Harris is inclined to keep Ron Rivera through the end of the regular season, but it is widely assumed that he will not be retained as head coach and the ostensible chief of football for the Commanders after the 17th game of the year. So the question on everyone's mind then is, if they plan to fire Ron Rivera, sitting at 4-8, your playoff chances are essentially dead at this point. I mean, for Christ's sake, you're sitting at the number 5 overall selection in the 2024 NFL draft as we sit here today. Why not just fire the guy? Why not give somebody else on this coaching staff, namely Eric Bieniemy, a shot at the head coaching position to try to audition for this role moving forward and try to prove that he is the right guy to lead this Commanders football team into the future? And what that likely answer is that Josh Harris, the Commanders owner here, majority owner, isn't considering anybody on this current Commanders coaching staff, including Eric Bieniemy, for the head coaching position moving into the future. Now, my question when it comes to this is, why not give Eric Bieniemy a shot? Your season is over. You might have a hidden gem right here in Eric Bieniemy, and we already know that Sam Howell, the quarterback, is already very comfortable in EB's system here in Washington. So I just don't understand why Josh Harris and the Commanders brass wouldn't consider this guy as at least an interim to see if he has the chops to be a head coach in this league right now. If you look at Bieniemy's resume, I mean, it's just about as good as anybody in the National Football League. He's a 2-time Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator and play caller there with the Kansas City Chiefs. Lots of people think that it was actually Andy Reid calling the plays. They would be wrong. Eric Bieniemy was the one coming up with the game plans, calling the plays on the sideline for Patrick Mahomes during that 5-year stretch where they went to 5 straight AFC championship games and won 2 Super Bowls. And then this passing game for the Commanders this year, despite having the worst offensive line arguably in league history, despite having a second-year quarterback in his first year in a starting role, who was a former 5th-round draft pick, completely turning a new leaf here and looking like a bona fide franchise quarterback, Josh Harris and the Commanders brass here just don't seem to see that Eric Bieniemy might be a really good fit as the future head coach here of the Washington Commanders. Now, my take on this is that the Commanders would be absolutely foolish. They would be fools not to give Eric Bieniemy at least a shot to be the interim head coach to prove that he can potentially take this Commanders franchise to the next level. I actually put Eric Bieniemy number 1 on my previous Ron Rivera replacements list because I think that this guy would actually do a pretty decent job. I think he holds guys accountable. I think Sam Howell is already effective in his system, and I think that he would clean house with the rest of the coaching staff and he would bring in his guys. So it would be pretty much a brand new defense, coming in with a new defensive coordinator, a whole new staff, but with Eric Bieniemy and his offense at the helm. I thought that would have been a great idea, but I also think that as Commanders fans here, we need to take something else into account here. And that's, since they're not considering Eric Bieniemy as their next head coach, that means they have an idea as to who they want to bring in, or at least hopefully they have an idea of who they want to bring in. Because if they have no plan right now and they're still not giving Eric Bieniemy a shot, I mean, that just takes the stupidity to a whole nother level here in Washington. So coming up next, I got my updated Ron Rivera replacements list, the top 10 short list of Washington Commanders head coach candidates for the start of the 2024 offseason. But before I get into that, let's have a word from our sponsor today at PrizePicks. And guys, if you're looking for a way to spice up your game days this NFL season, get started with PrizePicks today. It's a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. And if you're wondering how that works, here's how. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll go for more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can even win up to 25 times your money on any entry. So let's take a look at my entry for tonight's Monday Night Football matchup between the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears. I'm going to go with the more here with Justin Fields, the more on DJ Moore, and I'm going to go with the more on Jordan Addison. You can get your picks in before Monday Night Football or even Thursday Night Football this week if the game has already started. Check it out now at prizepicks.com/CLNS and use our code CLNS for a deposit match up to $100 today. With PrizePicks, it takes less than 60 seconds to make your picks. So get started right away. Get your picks in before Monday night tonight. Go to prizepicks.com/CLNS and use our code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100 today. So when it comes to what I'm looking for in a future head coach here for the Washington Commanders, the number one job of a head coach is not to be an offensive or defensive guru, or although that's nice, you want a guy that can command the locker room. You want a guy that's an excellent leader of men that's capable of getting players, NFL players, right? These are the best of the best in the world, to respect them and to follow them into battle week in, week out, even with a bad record. This is why the best coaches in the league, Mike Tomlin, Dan Campbell, all these guys that get their players to buy in consistently get good results from their squads and gets people not only to buy in for those seasons, but to stick around for the longevity, for the long haul. So in my opinion, because you got Sam Howell, you already have an established quarterback here. You don't necessarily need an offensive guy. I would be okay with bringing in a defensive mind here to Washington, but you do need to have connections to guys into some of the most modern and most revolutionary circles when it comes to the offensive side of the ball to pick an OC. So let's start with number 10 on my list. Let's start spicy here, man. Let's start with Kliff Kingsbury, former Cardinals head coach and current USC quarterbacks coach. Somebody that I think could be kind of a dark horse here to be the next Commanders head coach, because I think that this system, this air raid type system, this very spread heavy, shotgun heavy system, works well with Sam Howell's strengths. Not only is Sam used to running this type of system, he's very used to a spread type system. That's what they like to do here in Washington right now with Eric Bieniemy a lot. But also, Kliff Kingsbury is somebody that brings in a really different approach to Ron Rivera. His nickname is Coach Bro, right? He's bringing in a very collaborative feeling to the locker room. Now, things definitely fell apart there in Arizona before he got fired, so maybe not the number one option here, but if they kind of surprised some people and hired Kliff Kingsbury here, I think it would be a pretty decent fit between Sam Howell, the quarterback, and offensive play caller Kliff Kingsbury. Now, number 9, when it comes to the West Coast system, I'm not sure if Sam Howell is the right fit for those kinds of systems. It's lots of under center, lots of play action bootlegs, lots of like the traditional quarterback stuff that Sam Howell just really hasn't done this year with Eric Bieniemy. Lots of shotgun here, lots of progression reads, those types of things. And, although I don't think Sam Howell would be bad in a West Coast system, I think that he'd be better in some of these more shotgun-heavy systems. So Bobby Slowik might be the exception to that. Runs a Shanahan-style West Coast system. He runs it better than just about anybody in the league right now, other than Sean McVay and Shanahan himself. We know how good C.J. Stroud is doing in just his rookie season. He's having the best year for a quarterback in his rookie season in NFL history to this point, and a big reason for that is how buttoned up Bobby Slowik has that Texans offense going. Number 8, I got Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator for the Chargers. It looks like Brandon Staley has a pretty decent chance of getting fired. And if they don't elevate Kellen Moore up to the head coaching position there in LA, that means he's essentially a free agent. And I really do think that this is a good offensive fit for Sam Howell. I think Kellen is a very creative offensive mind. And then also he's got some inside information on the Dallas Cowboys, especially if Dan Quinn and Mike McCarthy are still there in Dallas come the 2024 season, and that's always valuable. Speaking of getting a little bit of insight on one of your rivals, you could bring in Brian Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's somebody that's been thrown around as a potential head coaching candidate after Shane Steichen, last year's offensive coordinator for the Eagles, has been absolutely doing a great job with the Indianapolis Indianapolis Colts, kind of making lemonade out of lemons there with Gardner Minshew as his quarterback there in Indy. They're currently the 7th seed in the AFC playoff picture. And Brian Johnson, I think he runs a very similar system to what I want to see Sam Howell run, who kind of compares to Jalen Hurts in terms of pure skill set, in my opinion. I think that'd be a good fit for Sam Howell moving forward if you're going to hire an offensive coach. Now, I've got some defensive-minded head coaches coming up here in just a second. Let me know who should be the next head coach, or should the next head coach be offensive or defensive-minded for the Washington Commanders? Type O if you think they should be an offensive head coach, or type D if you think they should be a defensive head coach. Now let's get to the defensive guys. And number 6 also might surprise some people. Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator for the Las Vegas Raiders, is one of the most impressive defensive minds in this league. Something that really shows me that you are a really great defensive minded football coach is that you tailor your defense around the talents of your players, and you don't try to fit round pegs into square holes or square pegs into round holes there in terms of putting players into your system, right? I think Patrick Graham knows how to execute a bunch of different schemes, and he can really switch things up on you, and that's something I really like in a potential defensive play caller. Don't necessarily know how good he could handle the locker room as a leader, but overall, one of the best defensive minds in the league. I think the Commanders would be lucky to have him. Then number 5, the GOAT himself, Bill Belichick, makes my list, but the reason why he's down on this list and not higher is that I think Bill is probably going to want to be the head coach plus GM if he comes here, and I don't want that, man. I think he's one of the worst, if not the worst, front office executives in the league right now, evidenced by how freaking terrible that New England Patriots roster is now. I mean, they just have no talent in New England anymore because Bill Belichick. I mean, let's just face it, guys. Being a head coach and a GM in this league, that's 2 full-time jobs, and it's really tough to do for anybody to do it at a high level, especially when most of these other teams, they have a dedicated head coach and a dedicated GM. It just puts you at a disadvantage. So I really don't want Bill Belichick here if he's going to be the GM. But let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. Would you hire Bill Belichick? Type B if you would allow him to be both the head coach and the GM. Type Y if you'd make him the head coach only, or type P if you're going to pass on him altogether. For me, I'm going to type my Y in the comment section because I love him as a head coach, but just not as a GM. Next up on the list, Brian Flores, Minnesota's defensive coordinator. Maybe not the best fit for this year's first-round draft pick in Emmanuel Forbes because it's going to be mostly cover zero. Emmanuel Forbes has been caught on double moves a ton this year, so not sure how much I trust him on an island at this point, but everyone acknowledges that Flores is a defensive genius, doing some really revolutionary stuff on the defensive side of the ball. So if you can get Flores, also a great leader of men, can elevate a roster like he did there with the Miami Dolphins for years, I would love him as a head coach here in Washington. Then number 3, Dan Quinn, the Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator. We hate them Cowgirls here on the Commanders Report, but you know what? Getting somebody that's been down enemy lines there, like Dan Quinn, knows all the secrets of that team, what the strengths are for them, what the weaknesses are for them. Having a guy like that in your building to kind of exploit those weaknesses is absolutely invaluable. And Dan Quinn, somebody that's been to a Super Bowl as a head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, somebody that's really done a great job as the defensive play caller there in Dallas over the last several years, I think would bring a culture change here in Washington and one that would be much welcomed. Then number 2 on my list, if the Bills decide to fire Sean McDermott, if they miss the playoffs, they might, sitting at 6-6 right now. He might be available, and I think that he's a really good culture builder. I think that he's somebody that would bring Leslie Frazier, one of the best defensive coordinators in the National Football League, here to Washington. I think that cover 4 heavy style system would be would be a really good fit for Emmanuel Forbes' skill set there as you try to tailor him into your number 1 corner moving forward. I think Sean McDermott is an excellent option. And then finally, this guy's going to be number 1 on just about every team's list. Ben Johnson, the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator, an offensive genius, a top 10 offensive play caller in this league already, and he's never been a head coach. He's super young. He's ready to go. And I think that if the Commanders can land him, it's going to be tough because he's going to have his pick of the litter. But if you can get Ben Johnson as your next head coach, watch out because the Commanders are getting back to the Super Bowl. All right, now we get to the honorable mentions here. Most of these guys, actually all these guys, come from West Coast backgrounds. I like the West Coast system offense. I think it's a very effective way to create space and kind of confuse the defense and make the defense work. So Frank Smith, Shane Waldron, Zach Robinson, and Chris Forster are all names to monitor as well. But like I said earlier in today's show, just not sure how well it fits with Sam Howell's skill set specifically. So I'd be happy with any of these guys as the next head coach, but they don't make my top 10 list, at least this time. So let me know down in the comment section, who is your guy? Who do you want to see as the next head coach of the Washington Commanders? Let me know who you guys want as the next head coach down there in the comments section. And that'll be it for today's show, guys. Really do appreciate all of your support. Make sure you click that subscribe button for more Commanders news and rumors coverage throughout this week, throughout the offseason, and all year round.